Hello and welcome to Tipsy Tolstoy, Russian literature for the inebriated.
I'm Matt Gerasimovich, a PhD student in Russian Lit, who is currently recording this podcast instead of working on my presentation that's due this week. Yeah.
This is kind of like doing your PhD, except it's not recognized by your institution,
Right.
so it's just a couple minor differences. Yeah. Well, other than that, I'm Cameron Lalana, and this week for two separate projects I'm working on, I've been reading Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is all about, revolutionary forms of pedagogy, and Edward Limonov's The Other Russia, which is kind of like the opposite of that. Anyway, so they both touch on pedagogy, as you might imagine. Freire's actual pedagogy, Limonov is like, what if we taught the kids how to use guns and then use them for revolution? Everyone's going to die young, but it's going to be really fun. And because I'm reading them both at the same time, I can't help but mentally compare the two, and I can't physically stop myself because you really shouldn't. But I've been just tortured by like the fact that I can't separate my brain this week. So that's what I'm doing.
Fortunately, nobody besides us and the couple people listening probably know the difference, so you're probably safe.
Between Paulo Freire and Edward Limonov?
For now, you're safe.
I don't think anyone who reads Paulo Freire or who reads Edward Limonov knows who the other one is.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Well,
anyway.
You do, so enjoy. Well, this is a podcast where me and my good pal Cameron get to unwind from our week with some Russian literature and a drink or two. This week, we are back with parts 4, 5, and 6 of Eugene Onegin by Aleksandr Pushkin. This is part 2 of 3 in our Onegin series, so thanks for coming back. Or if you started listening in the middle of it, you should go back. That's strange.
Some of you think that's a joke, but there have been a couple series where we've got part 2s and 3s where they have more listens than part 1. And
why?
So many questions.
Cement part 2. Why do so many of you want Cement part 2 but not Cement part 1? Do you need to know if they build the factory? They do. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, so if you're one of those people, please reveal yourself to us and explain yourself. Well, if you would like a say in what we're reading next, like maybe just part 2 of a book, apparently, for you Cement part 2 fans out there, or you would like to stop our impending pivot to mostly being about socialist realism, that joke doesn't land as hard after the Cement thing, head on over to patreon.com/tipsytolstoy. For as little as $3 a month, you can keep your favorite Russian literature podcast running and join in on fun events like our recent habit of occasionally streaming visual novels. And as long as we're on the topic, we'd like to extend a thank you to our newest patrons, Eli, Caitlin, Brett, and Isaac. If you're not interested in Patreon but still want to help us out, you can leave us a nice review on Apple Podcasts or sign up for our email list on our website, tipsytolstoy.com.
That's wonderful, Cameron. Everyone should do all the things that you said, and we would be just super appreciative. But Cameron, before we get into Onegin, I have to ask you, because we forgot to ask at the beginning of last episode, and it's in our name, so it's pretty bad of us to forget. What are you drinking this fine eve?
So, luckily, don't worry. Last time, as you probably figured out, still very drunk.
Mm-hmm.
Just forgot to mention it.
Yes.
This week, I've been enjoying our narrator's ramblings. So I didn't get Bordeaux as the narrator has hypes up, but I did get a Pinot Noir, very cheap Pinot Noir, to have not an equivalent, just a red to drink while we're doing this. But how about you, Matt? What are you doing?
I got a real beer for the podcast this time.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, okay. What do we got?
Yes. Courtesy of Pipeworks Brewing here in Chicago. It's
Classic.
called Friend with Two Boats. It is...
Okay.
It's really good. It just has... I don't even know what kind of beer it is, but the flavors are passion fruit, orange juice, and coconut. Okay. It is very strange, but it is, in fact, 7.5% alcohol, and it comes in a pint. And it's got some unicorns riding jet skis. So
nice.
I choose beers exclusively based on what the weirdest labels I can find are.
And they're often Pipeworks.
It's often Pipeworks, yes, and I do appreciate that. So shout out Pipeworks Brewing. Send me beer.
What kind of beer is it?
I don't know.
Fair enough.
A little bit of mystery. It just says fruit beer.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Okay.
I don't know if I've had a fruit beer before, but
I think we might have had one in Russia when we were at that crap. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but
it's precisely here and there.
at the craft beer festival. Maybe if you have a chance to go in, get one.
Coward.
You know who's not a coward?
Who?
Lenski for engaging in the duel. Well, also starting the duel.
Wow. Why was he dueling, Cameron?
Well, let's find out about that.
Okay.
So, Chapter 4 of Eugene Onegin, we, of course, as you probably remember, left off last time as Eugene and Tatiana were in the garden, and Eugene has kind of eyes ablaze after Tatiana has sent him this letter confessing her love. And we actually open up with some unrelated bits where the narrators just kind of talk about how like their forefathers really attempted seduction, and he's like, back in those days, how the less you cared, actually, the more it seemed attractive. So, peak r/nice.
I like that it's the part 4 starts with the narrator telling you how to neg someone.
Part 4 of maybe one of the greatest pieces of Russian literature opens up on why do women only like douchebags?
Nobody ever likes me, the narrator, and I promise I'm really nice, but they force me to do this.
Yeah, so...
But it's ironic?
I don't know, but...
Try that 3 seconds of silence.
Well, either way, whatever the mode is these days, or those days, 300 years ago, Eugene is quite good at it. He's quite good at breaking hearts and engaging in it and never caring about who he leaves behind. So, as we're turning them now, Eugene tells Tatiana that at one point in time when he was in his younger, he's like, I don't know, like 25 now, and he's in the young days of being like 23, he might have taken her up on her love and her letter, but now that he's old, he's learned that happiness is not for him, and he could never be just like married, because eventually she would just ask too many things of him, and he would close his heart to her, and that would make their marriage bad. And really, by turning her down now, he's actually doing a very good thing for her, and she should really learn from this experience, and yada yada yada. And he does that thing where you open yourself up to someone, and then they give you a lecture about it, and you're like, this is cool, I love this, which Tatiana does. She breaks down, not crying, but she's like, she was dying, so take that as you will. And kind of they have a moment of like kind of minor physical intimacy of like him, kind of her putting her head down on him, feeling not great. And then the narrator goes off on another talk about kith and kin, and as well as tender beauties in our lives and the difference between those three things, which ends on the narrator saying, just be yourself, be your whole care, your loved one, honorable reader, deserving object, there can be nothing more lovable than he. So we've gone from women only like douchebags to, actually, I don't need women anymore. I'm going my own way.
Love yourself.
Full MGTOW. Are we a self-help book now? Love the narrator's interjections. So following this, they kind of brings her back to the house, and Tatiana is struck by a greater sadness, as you might imagine, that kind of consumes her going forward. And although no one can really say that anyone acted improperly here, the way that Tatiana is after that has the neighbors talking about Eugene. They were already predisposed not to liking him, so that's increases the talk of the town. Again, the narrator the narrator here declares his love for Tatiana, and then goes off about writing poetry and says, "Bards of our cheerful generation, have you read lines of your creation to your loved ones?" Extolling them not to read the elders, the ancients, but rather to read their own creation, which is really funny because he later admits to not doing that either. And only reading his own poetry to his nursemaid. I love our narrator. He's such a great interjection.
King.
So following this, Eugene begins to live as basically a hermit. He's just walking, reading, riding his horses, just being a country gentleman who just never engages in social life, which is all the better for everyone around him because people don't really like him all that much. And he's pretty happy doing what he does. As this goes on, winter begins to set in, real autumn, but we're getting closer to it. And the narrator goes off here on a little tangent about the right alcohols to drink, champagne, other wines, before settling and telling everyone that really it's Bordeaux that's kind of the best for this. And speaking of Bordeaux, we kind of drop in on an evening conversation where I don't think, at least maybe I missed it, the characters aren't named, but it's heavily implied, and basically it's Lenski and Eugene who are chatting about what's going on. And Lenski or Vladimir is like, hey, it's going to be this little thing at Olga's family's house. Do you want to come by? And he manages to convince Eugene to come with him. And this chapter ends on the narrator. I know I'm talking more about the narrator than Eugene, but man, I love our narrator. And he's talking about how people like Lenski see the love in everyone and feel good about life, but opposed to those young people who are just so sober and loving of life. But piteous he, the all-foreseeing, the sober head, detesting each human reaction, every speech in the expression of its being, whose heart experience has cooled and saved from being charmed or fooled. So just drink more and be more cynical.
Think about it.
That's what I'm hearing here.
That's kind of what we do, actually.
I guess we kind of have made a whole podcast out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the narrator's being a bit facetious or ironic at times, but this one you should take that advice.
Yes.
Or at least don't fault us for taking it.
No, you can't. Pushkin told me to.
And Pushkin's never wrong.
Correct.
So we're now, we fast forward a bit. We're in January. It's too cold now to really do those old, activities. It's really just everyone's kind of inside drinking, really, and going to, events with each other. Tatiana at this point has grown greatly superstitious, not only in positive but negative ways, seeing both negative omens everywhere, but also positive omens, and going to older people who are closer to kind of a Slavic pre-Christian kind of tradition, and begins to act on their advice, put things up, reading omens and such. Now, this one night when she's putting such symbology over her head, begins to have a dream of being pursued through an Arctic tundra by a bear. And that bear eventually, understandably, she runs from it, eventually catches up to her because it's a bear. And instead of hurting her, actually carries her to kind of like a cabin where inside she hears a party, and peeking through a door happens to see a room full of monsters, just all of the kinds of creatures that are amalgamations of different animals and sea creatures and all this sort of stuff. And at the very end of the table, there's Eugene Onegin chatting with everyone as if he belongs there, absolutely not physically monstrous at all. And she notices that the whole party seems to move at his beck and call. Feeling comforted by that, she opens the door a little bit to maybe go in, at which point a gust of wind blows out the candles and monsters begin to run at her, but they're stopped by Onegin, who is like, she's mine, which is, terrifying. At that point, Tatiana is woken up by Olga, who's like, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? And as you might imagine, Tatiana is quite put off by that, and spends the rest of the day reading, essentially just reading to kind of calm down from it. She doesn't really understand what happened in that dream, what it meant, but she's understandably quite upset by it. So a few days later, we now are at the party that Lenski invited Onegin to, which is Tatiana's name day party. And there's a big crowd of guests, and although Vladimir told Onegin that the party would be relatively small, it'd be just like a kind of a family gathering, it's a party. Which Onegin not super happy to be in. He doesn't love this kind of stuff, as you've gathered from the rest of this book. And in fact, he really doesn't like the rest of these people, and the narrator spends time going through each one and their particulars, and is like welcoming them in, which Onegin is having absolutely none of.
I agree. This is like the worst situation in the world for those of us that don't like to socialize.
No, that's fair. I get it.
I'm just saying, if we were to reinstate the duel, like, this would be a valid reason to do it. Like, accurately assess the size of your gathering, please, before inviting.
If you're going to invite your antisocial friend who everyone hates,
right,
make sure it's not to the biggest party you could.
Right. Is that too much to ask?
Yeah, that's true. That's right. So Onegin is like, yeah, all right, well, fuck you, Lenski. And he, when the, I think it's the mazurka, when the dance is happening, the all-important dance, which determines social standings, let's say vaguely, Onegin basically like kind of comes in and steals the dance of Olga from Lenski, who it's also, I should mention at this point that Lenski is like, when the narrator's talking about reading people your poetry, part of what leads into that is that Lenski is like, basically does nothing but like read Olga poetry and all this kind of stuff, and none of it's his own, which is why the narrator goes off on that. But he's spending essentially his whole life it revolves around Olga. He's 18. He's like fall in love for the first time, and he's got no responsibility. So
he's 18 and a poet. What do you expect him to do?
He's 18 and he's a rich poet.
Yeah, that's true.
And speaking of being 18 and a rich poet, Onegin is. Keep in mind, when in his younger days, he was quite the rogue himself, and easily made people fall in love with him. And Onegin is quite adept at using his charm upon Olga. At which point, Lenski is like not happy, and he basically rushes out of the party. At the same time, Tatiana is like, "Oh no, I don't." Well, yeah, the guy she fell in love with is like dancing with her sister. It's not. I don't think I need to give you an analysis of why you wouldn't love that, or why Tatiana doesn't love it.
Or why Lenski feels slighted.
Yes. Yeah.
Most importantly.
Yeah, most importantly in what happens in the next chapter. So in the following chapter, Tatiana is obviously continues to worry about it. But in the next morning, Onegin receives a visit from a courier, essentially, from Lenski, which challenges him to a duel. Onegin is like, okay, fine, but is not super overjoyed about it. So Lenski is like, he's in a tizzy. He's not happy. He's like, what was Olga doing this intentionally? Why did what happened? He's not frankly, like he's a little bit, he's having some second thoughts. Maybe not about the duel, but like about what's going on right now. So he goes to Olga's family's house, and there's no confrontation because Olga's like, it wasn't anything there. It was Onegin trying to be like, I dance now, and then Lenski's like, I'm 18, so I gotta kill you now. So he's like, okay, maybe this isn't so bad, but he doesn't change his plans for the duel. So he leaves and he goes out to go back to essentially get ready for this duel. As they're leading up into it, they are both primarily hanging with Lenski as he's reading poetry, and he's thinking about like, I may die tomorrow. Which, I mean, yeah, you challenge a guy to shoot a gun at you because you're kind of mildly mad at a dance, but, that's how duels work. The next morning, we go out to the dueling ground with Lenski, who goes with the courier, Zaretsky, who's his second. Onegin comes late because he's Onegin. He brings his servant as the second. As they go to the line, they walk out their paces, they turn around to aim, but before Vladimir can even fire his gun, he's struck in the heart by a bullet, and he falls dead.
Bam.
Yeah. You ever just shoot your 18-year-old friend?
Bro, all the time.
So Onegin like kind of rushes over to Lenski, but there's nothing to be done because he's extremely dead.
Even the horses know he's dead when they load him up.
Yeah, it's pretty...
He's dead.
He's real dead.
Yeah. Can't hit that point home enough.
Yeah, so he's essentially he's gone, he's buried, and at this point the narrator kind of goes off in his own direction, talking about poetry and imploring the reader to weep for Lenski's end, talking through kind of like, obviously bad that being young and passionate like this led to him dying, but maybe think about some of it, and talks about the lives of which we all live, and says, this is talking about men's thoughts, their plots, the words they speak, all the emptiness so killing. That's the morass I beg you note, in which dear friends were all afloat. And we end chapter 6. So duels, Matt, you love duels. You love engaging in duels.
I do love duels. This is the duel, by the way.
Yeah.
This is the duel to end all duels.
Sure. What makes it the duel to end all duels?
Couple things. Probably we can talk through a couple of the points, because I'm going to just go on a little bit of a limb and assume that there is at least one listener out there who is not aware of 19th century dueling conventions. I know it's a little crazy to assume. since this is something that's so, just so prevalent in everyday modern culture. Is,
naturally.
How duels work. So one of the interesting things that happens at the end that we didn't discuss, but when Lenski's grave is described, I don't know if you picked up on this or not, he's not buried in the cemetery. Lenski cannot be buried in the cemetery because it's implied that, or I don't know, it may be actually explicitly written in their cartel or their dueling agreement at the beginning that the seconds have arranged. Lenski's death is going to be ruled suicide, basically. And this is very common for duels because at this point they were not legal to be doing. So basically what would happen is it would be a suicide, but everybody would know that it was a duel. And maybe there would be some sort of investigation. This is actually why Onegin is going to leave kind of this area for a little bit towards the end after the duel to kind of just get away, kind of not rouse any sort of suspicion.
Yeah.
Yes, so it is going to be ruled a suicide, which is pretty big offense, pretty big sin in the Orthodox Church. So he's not going to be allowed to be buried in Orthodox cemetery, which is to say, in Russia at this time, a cemetery. So that's why he's described as kind of this sad sort of just kind of off the road, just between these pine trees. He's just got a little monument, if you will. It's probably more just a little pile of dirt. That was just an interesting thing that I noted about the end of the duel.
That is interesting.
Yeah, that's not literary. That's just facts, baby. Hitting you with that cold hard duel facts.
That's what we're here for. I know that's like outside of the podcast for a second. I don't remember if this is before or after you entered your program, but you texted me and you're like, dude, I think this is before because this is when Matt Lortime was thinking about going to law school, and you were like, I don't want to go to law school. I just want to study 19th century duels. Yeah,
that's true.
Or duel literature.
And now I do that, and I get paid for it. It's awesome.
Don't let your dreams be dreams.
No, just let the memes be memes. That's essentially what my life has become. Okay, you got more on duels.
Yeah, please keep going. I want to hear all you got to say about duels because this is not something I know that much. Yeah, despite I've known you for so many years, and you're like, oh, I want to go to PhD school, which is the technical term for it, to learn about duels. And then you want to start a podcast with me about this, and you never told me about duels. I'm offended, actually.
You're welcome. Well, you're gonna get a little duel knowledge now. I gotta make sure I had to lay the groundwork to make sure you were adequately prepped.
That's fair. I've only known you for 4 years, and now finally we're breaking the barrier, like the final friendship barrier. I can to learn about your duel knowledge.
That's right. It's too much. So it's the duel that never should have happened, basically, for a variety of reasons, which is really funny because the whole novel is about fate in one way or another, and the whole duel is framed as sort of this fatalist, determinist, like it had to happen this way. This is fate just forcing the duel forward. When in actuality, Onegin gives Lenski plenty of chances to call the duel off. Multiple chances. The first one, it's noted that Onegin is like hours late to his own duel, which is a pretty big no-no. Really, you only had to be, I think, a couple minutes late, 10, 15 minutes, and it was more or less acceptable to call off a duel. So the fact that Lenski was waiting there for him even while this was happening is it shows you kind of how bad Lenski wanted to have this duel. And then Onegin shows up with his servant, which is an incredibly big sign of disrespect because seconds have to be of equal social standing to the people that are dueling. So him showing up with his servant is extremely uncharacteristic of duels at this time. And then finally, the part of the reason that you have seconds is that's where your communication is supposed to go through. So he calls out to Lenski trying to get him to call off the duel, and he doesn't. And so you're not really supposed to speak to the person you're dueling. You're dueling them for a reason. If you wanted to resolve the conflict, you do it before the duel, or you have the seconds kind of speak, but you don't do it while you are dueling. So Onegin gives Lenski 3 legitimate reasons to cancel the duel, and Lenski does not take him up on this. And Onegin, despite being this sort of Byronic, I want to take on the world hero, kind of here, I don't think he is. He is forced into the duel, not because he wants to duel Lenski, because not only does he say he doesn't want to, and then give him 3 reasons not to, he says the reason that he's forced into it is because people are going to think he's a coward if he doesn't, because he notes that Lenski's second is Zaretsky, who is like a famed duelist. Like everybody knows him for dueling. But he's also a really big gossip. So if Onegin is the one to chicken out of the duel, everyone in society is going to know. And that's going to be the end of his social status. That's like enough to destroy a reputation at this time. So despite the fact that allegedly he doesn't care about society, he still feels bound by social conventions here. Kind of interesting.
That is interesting. It kind of reminds me when we were talking about The Captain's Daughter, something you said to me was that I think The Captain's Daughter is sometimes cited as a kind of an example of like Russian, not fatalism, I guess fatalism, of like, oh, this was fated to be, this is how things had to go, even if it was good, bad, that was just how life was. But in many ways, The Captain's Daughter you could be read as kind of like an ironic take on that, where it's like a lot of things in there didn't need to happen, it was just chance, or it was very active participation. So it really, even though if you kind of read it briefly, you might be like, oh yeah, that's fate. It really had to be the actors engaging with what they did. Could this be read in the same way that you've got an ironic engagement with this idea of like, well, this is how fate must take us. You know, I've got to be this. Not that they actually think I've got to be this Byronic hero, but like, you know, I've got to save face. I've got to do this because this is the right thing for me to do. Of course, the reality is that at every stage of the way, you could step away, and Onegin is trying to get Lenski to step away from his 18-year-old right to kill someone who mildly offended him over his bow.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of heavy-handed irony throughout the novel, especially talking about fate. Though the fact of the matter is that Pushkin really did take fate pretty seriously. Fate, fortune-telling, omens, superstitions, these were all major parts of it. He was extremely, extremely superstitious. But then again, throughout his life, he also spends much of his time tempting his own fate. So there's kind of an interesting play on what's going on there in the novel. So it's I don't know exactly what to make of it. I won't draw any giant conclusions regarding fate because there's more for us to discuss. But that's kind of my takeaway on the duel. There's a lot with it. I enjoy the duel. It's one of my favorite duels. Top tier duel.
What are other similar duels for you?
Well, I like Fathers and Children with Bazarov.
Sure.
I think he's hilarious because he's Bazarov. That's really my top 2 duels, to be honest.
All right, fair enough. Both good duels.
Good duels. Good duels.
I've been telling Matt we should duel, but he's just like, I don't want to die, and like, I've got a girlfriend and a dog and a job, and I don't want to get shot. And I'm like, come on, man. Those are just excuses.
It's just excuses. I know. They are. You got me. You got me.
I'm saying, as I found it, you can get a black powder revolver mailed to your house. You get one mailed to your house. I get one mailed to mine. We duel.
This is going to get the podcast shut down. Or it's a new branding opportunity.
Like the new safe dueling system. We give you a real gun, then give you a body armor, and you can duel your friends.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
So, getting back on topic, I want to talk about the narrator for a little bit because I know it's kind of clowning on him, but when I say I love the narrator, I really do love the narrator.
Why do you love him? You want to be him?
No, I don't want to be. I think if the narrator was alive today, he'd probably be hanging out in the corners of the internet that I would fear to go.
Sure.
Yeah. I just want to get kind of your perspective on him because this is something I've been meaning to. Unfortunately, I haven't. In the research I've been doing, I didn't get a chance to touch on specifically analyses of like the role of the way in which Onegin, Lenski, Olga, Tatiana, despite being the central characters of this piece, are also subject to the whims of the narrator. Like if the narrator wants to talk about his wine, that's what's happening now. We're gonna get 3 stanzas about why Bordeaux is better than champagne, which is hilarious and similar. Sorry, I put my notes away from me right now, but it does. I know last time I kind of touched on and again, this is not something that I was reading in literature, but just like this feel of oral storytelling where there's a central story here, but the narrator is wandering off and on as he pleases, more or less. Where if he wants to be talking about the story, he's talking about the story. But if he wants to lecture to you about Lenski was trying to impress Olga, but he's reading old artists, and that's the problem with this tearful generation, that they don't read their own work. You should, if you're reading this, you should read your own poetry, your loved ones. But of course, I mean, I don't. I just read it to my nursemaid. But that's neither here nor there. I'd love to, watch the world around me anyway. It's a really interesting storytelling device, making your own main characters background features of the story.
He also constantly draws attention to the fact that he's telling you a story.
Yeah.
Which I think is funny. Like when he's going off and off about all of this other stuff, and he says, in this 5th chapter, I shall cleanse of its digressions when it ends. And I'm just like, all right. And now we're back to all right. And then he does. And then he does do that. Or sometimes he draws attention. I didn't mark it because I'm dumb, but there was one point where he draws attention to the fact that, like, what the rhyme of the next line is going to be, and he puts it in parentheses just to, like, break in.
He's like, I bet you think it's going to be this, don't you? And then he doesn't do the rhyme because... Actually, no, he does, because it's a meta joke, because him being like, I bet you think this is going to be the rhyme, don't you? Isn't itself the rhyme, and then he continues on.
Yeah, it's good. I also love the narrator. I think upon rereading, I was struck by actually how little you see of all of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. The narrator, I guess, didn't make as big of a presence on me, clearly, the first time that I read it when I was in undergrad.
Right. I mean, you're led to... It's called Eugene Onegin, and it's mostly about the story of Onegin and the people around him.
Mostly.
Which hides the fact that, maybe next week I'll come back and tell you whether or not this is true. I think most of the stanzas are not actually about any of these characters. Most of the
Cameron
stanzas,
has to go
I
back
would
and count them all.
Now I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna go back. This is something. Hold me accountable for next episode. I'm gonna go back and count about the number of stanzas which actually mention any of these 4 main characters, and the other ones, and the ones which are just about something the narrator's kind of peeved about.
Just turning this into a big digital humanities project. Just laying the groundwork for some Tipsy Tolstoy grants.
That's important. That's what we're here for. I mean, it's mostly not about it's I think at some point I saw Onegin referred to as kind of like a wandering main character, because he truly it's not that he wanders in and out of the story. That's incorrect, because that would imply that he's got some sort of agency when he enters the story. It's the narrator giving you access to these characters when he's decided he's done telling you about how when my father was a boy, he was mean. He negged the woman around him, and they loved it.
It's like being trapped at a family dinner when someone's telling you a story.
Yeah.
And you're like, please stop. And it keeps going. And then it's also one of the greatest works of world literature ever written.
Well, that's the thing is, like, I know I don't want to harp on this again, because again, this is like no literature background, and normally I like to ground this in. Normally I like to do that thing where I ground everything I say in someone else's opinion. So if you come for me, I can just be like, well, it's really... Can't
ever get to you, that's right.
Yeah, it's really not mine. So I'm going to step on a branch here and reiterate that this does feel like... And again, maybe this is a lacking on my part of understanding like European literature in this context. Maybe you saw this more often than just Onegin or like Descartes' Meditations, but this kind of like just conversational style. And if anyone actually knows more about this, I'd please come into our Discord server, which you can find in the show notes for this, or send us an email on our website that engages more with like...
Good plug. That was smooth. Smooth plug.
Thank you. That engages more with this like very conversational tone. It is interesting. It feels again like the gap between kind of oral storytelling and the written word, which a lot of the older like the Odyssey or Beowulf all now recognized as literature, which were in their own times actually oral storytelling. And this feels like kind of the in between. Obviously in an era when it was probably not intended, almost definitely not intended to be an oral storytelling, but does have that same vibe as reading the Odyssey or Beowulf, like I mentioned before, where it feels like a written version of something that was really just meant to be told over, told to your buddies as you're trying to get through the long months of winter when nothing grows and you're just going through the last stashes of your food and drinking a lot of Bordeaux to pass the time.
Just all Bordeaux. No food, just Bordeaux.
It's the life of the Russian aristocracy.
Do you want to talk about Tatiana some more?
Let's talk about Tatiana some more. Yes, let's go back. Let's go. Do you want to go back to her dreams or Tatiana as a whole?
I want to go back to the whole unit, Tatiana.
Let's do it. Let's go back to the whole absolute unit, Tatiana.
There's probably the most famous stanza that describes her in part 5, stanza number 4, talking about Tatiana is she's Russian to the core because she loves the winter. And I remember the first time that I read this, I was just kind of my unnuanced view where I was like, yeah, that's right. She likes the winter. Yeah, that's good characterization. But then I was just, my goodness, the more I was reading this, when I got to this part, I found this line absolutely hilarious. After the narrator builds up this whole thing, Tatiana, like, not only can she not really write well in Russian because she has to write her letter to Onegin in French, I don't think she reads anything in Russian. She's just reading like Western European romantic novels. So I'm really not sure what exactly about her is makes her Russian to the core. I know he kind of starts to answer this, which is also kind of interesting. I think he's relating her sense of like mysticism and whatnot to her sense of Russian identity, what kind of more broadly, which is this is an interesting point that he starts to bring in. And I will link. Okay, let me do biography first, and then I'll link it back to poetry. So, stanza 6. Oh God, I wish I could read them together, but God forbid the narrator puts it in a way that's conducive for me to not have to read literally the entire stanza. Basically, she talks about how she would turn her carriage back if she met a monk that's dressed in black, or if a hare was going to cross her tracks. And these were things that Pushkin would do himself. So he's kind of writing himself into some of the characters. It's a well-known story that Pushkin was actually on his way to Petersburg the night of the Decembrist revolt, but there was a hare that crossed his track when he was in his carriage, so he turned back because this is an especially bad omen. And so it's just kind of funny to see these kind of the romanticism with the biographical detail written into some of that. So maybe that makes her Russian to the core. I don't know. What do I know? I just have half a PhD.
I mean, you already made the comparison to Bazarov and Fathers and Children. Maybe what doesn't Turgenev call? I want to say Bazarov's mother, the last of a certain generation of real Russian women who are super great at canning, first of all, but also like super, really what's the Dvai like they're very two-soul. They're like Christian by religion, but very paganistic in terms of how they actually like live their day-to-day lives. And I guess it should be mentioned, very anti-Semitic. That was the other thing you mentioned. Sure. That was
goes without saying, but you should say it. You should say it.
Yeah. But yeah, kind of like that. This idea of a certain idea of Russianness engaged in that spiritualism, which I guess kind of goes beyond that. Just Russian, or like I guess it doesn't work so easily in English, but like the idea of like Ruskiye, like Russianness, and what I'm gonna like broadly term Rossiyskiye, like Russianness, where in taking over to Zulekha, obviously the territory that the Imperial Russian Empire covered also included a huge amount of people who were Muslim, or who were Buddhist, or who were a variety of smaller religions or ethnic groups who had a kind of not similarly, but like a sort of even all these. Actually, I can't speak to the Buddhists as much because that's not a background I have, but like the groups of people here have like this kind of melding, this Rossiyskiye, like the Russian, like non-ethnic, like just like territorial kind of Russianness, whatever your background, whatever your religion, having that kind of combination of the sort of pre whatever religion is there, this pagan daily sense combined with that broader religious sense, which maybe makes Tatiana Russian in the sense that Pushkin's talking about.
I think she forms the basis of this like innate sense of Slavic or Russian spiritualism that continues to get taken up by other writers, which is interesting to trace, but we don't have time to do it here. we would need a lifetime.
If you're a grad student looking for a project, there you go.
It's probably already been done. I just haven't read it. But
if you're a grad student who already did that project, let us know.
Let us know. So I also saw, if anybody happens to at all be interested in how Pushkin is relating to other poets of the time.
Sure.
He starts off with a quote from the poet Zhukovsky, who Pushkin was very close with him. He was in a poetry semi-secret society with him. So he starts off with his quote. Zhukovsky was known for being a mystic, basically. He was really into mysticism. And I won't go into the Pushkin-Zhukovsky relationship necessarily, but Zhukovsky, one of the major things that he did for 19th century Russian literature was introducing the topos of the swimmer. So anything that has to do with boats or sails or people literally swimming comes from Zhukovsky. And this is kind of how 19th century poetry develops, and really poetry in general develops for a long time, at least in the Russian tradition, which is somebody will introduce a topic or a topos, and it will then be rewritten by everybody after them. I don't know why it develops this way, but it does. It probably has to do with the fact that they were all studying together. So they were all only reading, really like a handful of people that were writing poetry. There really weren't that many of them. And so I think Pushkin is partially rewriting the topos of the swimmer in Tatiana's Dream, at least in the beginning, when she's got the kind of the bridge that's just kind of go across, and there's the rushing water, and there's the scenery that's very kind of like an elegy. It's very stark contrast to the rest of the way that Onegin is written. So this is my kind of take on this. I know we don't have to analyze it completely now, because thankfully next episode Dr. Katya Bowers is going to be coming back, and she's already told me she wants to talk about Tatiana's Dream. So
perfect.
You cannot exhaust Tatiana's Dream. There's been so much written about her dream. It's an extremely major part of the book.
Yeah, hard to get around. I was gonna say let's talk more about that, but actually, you know what I've learned over my years of when I was working in journalism is that the first time you put a message out, it's always more powerful than the second time. So maybe we should close the door on too much about Tatiana's Dream and open it back up once we have an expert with us before we spread any. We could save some of it for then. There's a lot of analysis to go on that, to put it mildly. Yeah. The last thing I had is not particularly literary. Okay.
Just something I was kind of noticing from the intrusion from the narrator, if you will. The way that the action kind of develops according to the seasons, which I don't know. I'm sure other people do it, but the kind of romance develops through summer, autumn, maybe autumn,
right,
or maybe summer. Definitely before winter. Let's put it like that, because I noticed when winter was marked, and then there's like a definite cooling off after that point.
I think you're right. I think it's summer or spring, because autumn is when Tatiana goes full superstitious.
Yeah, so it's definitely, at least romantically, when passions are stirred. Obviously, you still get to fight a duel in the winter, so it's not like people aren't angry or passionate about something, but just a little something I noticed on this read around that I neglected to pick up on my first time through.
That is fun. Well, I think I'm looking forward to hearing more things that you picked up on the second read around. But for now, I think that's really all we had for this particular episode, which is a little shorter than we've been doing recently. It's wild to think that we used to be 45 minutes as a full podcast. We've gone like an hour to an hour and 10 as normal. But for now, this is like a good staging ground for today, for the next episode, where we'll be bringing it all back together and bringing in the extremely helpful Dr. Katya Bowers to talk more about what we're looking at here.
Yeah, she has a lot of good stuff to talk about. She said she wanted to talk about Tatiana's Dream, and then she said, it's all Gothic, winky face, so prepare yourself for the Gothicness. Take a trip down to Hot Topic, dye your hair black. It's about to get Gothic.
I had to dye my hair black before I went to Russia, because it was blue before then. Anyway, you know what else is Gothic? A book by Dr. Katya Bowers, which recently came out, which we will link in the show notes because it looks really interesting. I would like to. I've been planning to pick up a copy, and maybe by the time that she's on, I will have one, or we'll at least have it in the mail. Anyway,
you just say it loudly across the podcast waves. You can will it into existence.
We did that with Random House. We'll do it with the University of British Columbia.
That's right. All your books shall soon be yours.
Well, Matt, I know this is in our script, and it probably goes without saying. And our listeners are pretty smart. They probably figured it out. But I should ask you, what are we covering next time?
Next time, we're going to be finishing Onegin. So that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I'll miss it.
It's pretty good.
It's been really fun.
It has been. I love the duel. I would love to do a duel.
Love to do a duel. So we're going to be finishing with parts 7 and 8. We'll return briefly to talk about Tatiana's dream. And then after that, I'll have to let you know. I have to look at our schedule. We've got so many moving pieces going over the next couple of months between guest episodes, and we're going to be doing an author interview for the first time ever, which is really cool and exciting that they reached out to us and that we'll get to do that. So yeah, looking forward to it. But before we let you go, I got to know, Cameron, on a scale from 1 to Yeltsin, how drunk are you on your Bordeaux?
I was hoping we could match last episode where I want to say it was an 8. Probably wasn't an 8, but I was drunk enough to think it was. I'm going to say it's like a 5 here. Okay. Happy where I am. Definitely could drown the rest of this glass and really, really get into it as we're finishing it out. But how about you, Matt? Where are you?
I'm probably sitting around a 4 because I would have to shut my fat mouth for long enough to actually drink my beer, but I was too busy talking about Zhukovsky. So that kind of impeded my progress on the drunk meter, but
that's fair.
You know, once I finish this off air, we'll probably see a little increase in the in the meter action there.
Yeah, for any listeners who are worried, don't worry. I will stay here. I commit this to you right now. I will stay here until I've heard Matt drink the rest of that beer off air.
That is a commitment from us to you.
This is what accountability is called.
That's right. Cameron's the head of our accountability office.
Really shouldn't be.
No.
Yet a lot of the org that Matt and I put together is a lot of the positions are the people working there really shouldn't be. They're just there by default because it's just me and Matt filling these positions.
It's kind of like being a podcast host, just here by default. I started it, now I cannot be getting rid of it.
We're pulling the curtain back too far.
Edit it out.
No, I won't. I think this is what some people might call radical transparency. And you're like, what's the radical part of that? And I'm like, I don't know, but radical is a cool word. And, I see a lot of people online, anytime they do regular transparency, they call it radical transparency, and suddenly it's revolutionary.
That's true. Well, before we let you go, we want to extend a radical thank you to all of our current patrons that we have supporting the show. We've got Jeff, Madeline, Ann, Janice, Daniel, Darren, Daniel again, Jack, Paige, Jesse, Lou, Larkin, Irini, Brandon, Allison, Cole, Elise, Mysterious Donor Dude, Joanne, Drew, Yitza, Alex, Stephanie, and Julie. Podcasting isn't free and grad school doesn't pay very well, so if you're interested in joining with our current patrons to keep the show running, take a look at our Patreon at patreon.com/tipsytolstoy.
The music used in this episode was Soviet March by Toasted Tomatoes. You can find more of their stuff on toastedtomatoes.bandcamp.com and also on YouTube under the same username. If you're looking for other places to find us, you can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter under @TipsyTolstoyPodcast or join our email list on our website, tipsytolstoy.com.
You'll hear from us again soon.